Bjergsen has become head coach of TSM, and it's quite a bit of a shock. We all knew that he was kind of in his twilight years, as it were, even though, he's still quite a good mid laner, probably the best or second best, I'd say second best in North America. And he can basically transition to a positional coach at any moment in time. That would seem a little bit more appropriate given, his accolades and whatnot as a mid laner. But him being head coach, especially for TSM, is a strange move because if you look at Bjergsen just over his best years, it's him carrying very hard, destroying the enemy mid laner, and then taking over the game and whatnot and all that. But oftentimes you will see that slowly throughout his career, as it has progressed, he has sacrificed over and over and over and over again. And that has taken the toll on his actual individual gameplay, which you can see at the very twilight years of his career, especially this year in 2020, to where he was very selfless in that regard. He picked it up in playoffs in North America for sure, but he was playing more of supportive picks and whatnot, and then he tried to make that happen within Worlds. Didn't really work out too well. And so it just seems strange as though he would then move to the head coach position, given that head coach is supposed to be like this commanding figure, someone that is going to take the reins, take control, take responsibility over his entire team and whatnot. And I think in some sense you could say that, yeah, well, that kind of fits into the book, right? Because he is trying to take responsibility over the team by playing these supportive picks that maybe no one else wants to play. And so he takes the lowest rung in that sense, and he helps his teammates, play whatever picks that they want or whatever picks that enable them and make them feel comfortable and whatnot. So I could see that reasoning, but I mostly view his play style, I guess, as a bad thing in the end, because you look at just TSM in general with 2020, they looked really bad towards the end. They looked very disjointed at Worlds, right? Against good competition. That's kind of the caveat, I guess. And the fact that within North America, all of that shit would work, but as we know, and as is the same thing which happens to TSM over and over again, international play, it just doesn't fucking cut it, right? And in some sense, I wish that Bjergsen would have been that greedy player, right? Because he had the skills in order to back up those necessary resources that he might have asked for, right? And so he ended up not doing that as his career went on, and I found that as a disappointment. And so when I see this transition into head coach, I find small problems and holes here and there to where I don't think it's going to be that successful. So now that I've gotten all the fucking TSM fans riled up, let's talk about Bjergsen as a coach. So while he is a brilliant player and can maybe get players to buy into the systems that he's going to create and set up and whatnot, the package of a brilliant League of Legends player and then a brilliant coach is so fucking rare that the likelihood that Bjergsen is both of these things, I'd have to bet against Bjergsen. There's just so much evidence to where it's not necessarily that you have to be a great League of Legends player in order to be a great coach. I mean, you can look at over at Grabs, you can look at Reaper, who wasn't necessarily that great of a player anyways. Yeah, sure, he had his ups in that sense, but he certainly had his downs, right? It's funny to say downs. Anyways, so, and you have Daylor, one of the greatest coaches ever in League of Legends history, at least within the West. And then you have Young Buck as well, too, who was a professional player, but he was never a great professional player, right? So, as you can see, it's not a requirement to be, one of the best players to ever fucking touch the game. But with that said, I don't think it's necessarily going to knock someone for, becoming a coach or whatever. But in some sense, actually, when you think about it more elaborately, I think that it is somewhat of a knock, because when you think of the skills that it takes to become a professional player, and a great professional player at that, you have to sacrifice a lot of different things. You have to sacrifice maybe people skills. You have to sacrifice reading personalities. You have to sacrifice all these different things because you're focused on just playing the game and just practicing the game, right? Even in past interviews that Bjergsen had talked, he was saying that he would sacrifice his personal relationships with people in order to get those extra few hours of solo queue into the game. So don't you think that has stunted him somewhat in terms of his character growth in that sense? And maybe he's learned over the past years of how to maybe recoup that cost, but there's still that negative aspect that he has to constantly catch up and try and play catch up in terms of developing his own character and his own personalities and his own flaws and whatnot. So, great. We're all thinking, okay, he can dissect maybe what a mid laner is doing incorrectly, or even just a player in the broader game spectrum, right? But now, if the rumors are true that Power of Evil is coming into play for TSM as the mid laner, it's clear that Bjergsen is somewhat of a better player than Power of Evil. Obviously, Power of Evil was his kryptonite in some sense, as many people like to say. But then that comes to the idea of, well, is he going to try and change Power of Evil so much to where it's not Power of Evil anymore, right? And because there are certain things that make Power of Evil actually unique, which I think was part of the kryptonite of Bjergsen, was that he was he's so eccentric in the way maybe that he does his picks, or how he just plays around the map and whatnot. And he plays like this quasi selfish in the sense that he will try and at least get all the CS and maybe all the resources that he can by himself, but then he's able to help out the rest of the map in that terms, right? And also, more importantly, help out his jungler, something that I don't think Bjergsen did a whole lot of. So it's a difference in play style in that sense, right? It was always that Bjergsen wanted the jungler to help him rather than him helping his jungler, which is how I view Power of Evil style differs in that contrast in that sense, right? So is he going to change Power of Evil's perspective and how maybe Power of Evil should play the game? And is that going to be for the worse or for the better? And there's this overbearing idea of how to teach someone, in the sense that, well, if you give them too many things to work on at the same time, then the knowledge just isn't going to be retained in that sense. So is Bjergsen going to then spew out all these different things that PoE can improve on? You need to improve your lane matchups, and your Azir or your Corki matchup, and then you need to also shore up how you play with your jungler. You need to have your jungler go ahead and do this and this, because this is how it's going to affect you in that sense. And then you also need to be able to help out maybe your bot lane and play these supportive picks and whatnot and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, maybe it's going to be information overload in that sense. And Bjergsen doesn't have the know-how in order to parse that through and give him, this feeder drip in that sense, this IV to say, hey, here's this bit of information that could help you. Here's this bit, right? And then you come on to the idea of, well, maybe if this relationship develops between these two mid laners, now it's going to seem like a sort of favoritism in that sense, or even worse, it's going to seem like he's nitpicking on this guy, right? Constantly, because he has a lot of information about the mid lane. So he has more to say, or more criticisms to give to Power of Evil himself, or whoever the fuck mid laner that they're going to pick. But it seems like Power of Evil for now. So is that going to be a problem, right? Then you look at the broader idea of Bjergsen as a coach. What about conflict resolution? Is Bjergsen going to be good at conflict resolution? Because that is the majority of what a head coach theoretically is supposed to be, is to be able to dissect the problems within a team versus, personalities and whatnot, or maybe ideas just about the game itself and the theory about the game, and come up with a solution in that sense. Is he able to do that? Right? And then overall game theory, in essence, is he able to give, this idea of how the game maybe should be structured in that sense, right? Of maybe we're going to be a top-centric team or a mid-centric team or a jungle-centric team or what have you, right? A bot-centric team. And so he's got to give this overall idea to everyone to then work on, because his whole general game theory is inclined to that aspect. So he has to be able to dish that out in a digestible way in that sense. Team bonding. Is he going to be able to facilitate ways in which people can team bond together? Team activities and whatnot. I don't know, fucking escape rooms at every. Well, I guess you can't do that shit now, right? So, but is he going to be able to develop a plan to where people can have adequate times and moments to where they can team bond and maybe good activities and whatnot, and just the psychology of maybe what is a good activity to team bond with, right? Is it going to bring this group of people together, maybe from different backgrounds, especially if you have imports and whatnot? And that's also another aspect, right? Of well, how do you integrate an import, someone from a different region, someone from China or someone from South Korea or someone from Brazil, what have you, whether they get these imports or not. Character development. Well, is Bjergsen going to be good with that in terms of how maybe a player should act, or also how they should act within a team environment, not just personally, or maybe even to management, but also how they interact with the team itself. So, and obviously Bjergsen had trouble with his character development in the very beginning too, and I think he would wholeheartedly admit that. And so is he going to be able to recognize maybe the faults that happened within his younger past to then help other players and learn that, these are the pitfalls that I went under. I want to help you, give you a little bit of a shortcut, give you a bridge to recognize that you're going down this path that doesn't lead to a good place. Is he going to be able to recognize these types of things? Personality management. Is he going to be able to reconcile between maybe a soft-spoken player and someone who is very abrasive or brash? Is he going to be able to have someone who always spits out, I don't know, like dumb ideas or some shit and just tell them to shut the fuck up, or, maybe more in a polite way of going about it? Is he then, since he's the head coach, obviously he's going to have coaches below him. Is he going to be able to manage those coaches? Like there are multiple different things that you have to master when it comes to just management and managing people and moving these chess pieces around. And it's more than just moving them around on the map. It's more than having them master the micro aspect or the macro aspect within the game itself. It's more than that. They're actual humans. They're actual people. You need to be able to move those chess pieces, off the board, as it were. So I would say, all in all, though, good thing is Reginald at least has checkmated fans, speaking of chess, and the fact that they can't possibly go against their king Bjergsen if the team crumbles, through personality clashes, drafts, or lack of identity. So, I always say that the greatest fault of Bjergsen wasn't his play necessarily, but it was his over willingness to sacrifice, but also that his coaching staff dropped the ball very fucking hard over and over and over again. You go with Parth, you go with fucking that Woodbuck guy, like there are multiple times. You go with Zix even, that didn't fit in that environment. It just happened over and over again. And I think so instead of Bjergsen trying to carry his teammates, he's decided to try and carry his coaching staff, right? Like that's the last solution in which he finds to where like, well, I've tried to carry in every other fucking aspect. Like this motherfucker is willing to do anything to win. So I guess I have to commend Bjergsen at least on that.